I am your champion. Oh man, that's classic. I love it. I'm going to climb that ladder of success all the way to the top. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Making the Towns with Brian Logan. I am your host, Brian Logan, and we are back for another episode, and I'm excited to be here. I hope everybody had a great week. I know I did. We got a lot of good stuff to get into today, but before we get started, I just want to thank everybody for being with me. And the premise of this show, if you're just joining us for the first time, this is episode 12, by the way. But I was in sports entertainment and the entertainment business and pro wrestling for over 30 some years. And during those years, I kept a journal. And of all the matches, the towns, the money, the bumps, finishes, etc. And we've been reviewing these one by one and going through all the towns and talking about the stories and the opponents and everything. And that's what we're doing here today. And also, I want to remind everybody that we have a sister show, a sister podcast that comes out each week based on this show, where me and Dallas Danger sit down in a Q&A format. And he asks questions based on this podcast, and we also sometimes read the listener comments or emails or anything we get like that and expand more on this topic. So if you enjoyed this show, the ride home is something that I'm sure you're going to enjoy, and that comes out every week right after these Making the Towns. But this is Making the Towns episode 12. So just want to thank everybody for subscribing to the YouTube channel. We've been talking about the YouTube channel since the inception of this podcast, and we put up a lot of videos, and we ask that you guys go over there and subscribe and help us out and ring that bell if you want to get notifications. But if you don't want notifications, please go over and subscribe and help us out, because we got a lot of cool things planned that we can only do after we have so many subscribers. But the YouTube is doing very well, and that is because of you guys. And I just want to thank you so much for what you guys have done so far and showing interest. The listeners are growing every week, and I'm just very thankful that you guys are taking these rides with us, making the towns and the ride home. But that YouTube channel is I Am Your Champion, ! On YouTube.com. So if you get a chance, go over there and subscribe if you have not. And if you have, keep looking for great content. We're putting up content as fast as we can. There are Apex Wrestling is on there, World Fighting Showcase, OVW, the stuff with Damien. Smoky Mountain Wrestling's in there. A lot of independent shots, WCW. Some other videos that I've made, as well as the documentary films that I have written, directed, and produced. They are on there too. And just check them out. I think there's a lot of good stuff. A lot of people like it, and I'm very pleased with all that. Also, your one-stop shop for everything Brian Logan, IamYourChampion.com. If you want to expand more, see some pictures, links to all the social medias, as well as links to the podcast. If you are listening on Pirate Flag Radio and this is new to you, go over to IamYourChampion.com for all things Brian Logan. We've got our store over there, more on that later. But where I'm going to be appearing and just all kinds of cool stuff. All things IamYourChampion.com. But we last left off. We're on 4/11/98, and we were on 4/10/98 when we last left off. So we're going to start today at 4/11/98, and we are in Buchanan, West Virginia. I wrestled as myself versus JT Nightmare and made $50. Buchanan is almost in the middle of West Virginia. It's almost dead center. And it has been a pivotal town for West Virginia wrestling. And a lot of the promoters over the years have ran Buchanan, and it is in an ideal spot to run because not only is it in the middle, but it's not that far off the interstate, but it's far enough off the interstate to where it's isolated a little bit. So the crowd there, I guess, is to its own. And it has always drawn so well there. And we started running it, of course. This would be one of the first, well, this is probably the first time we ran it. Eddie Edmonds and myself and Jim Hawkins would run Buchanan on a regular basis. I ran it myself. Mike Howardin ran it. A lot of promoters have ran that. It's the middle point that connects northern and southern West Virginia together. So it was such a good little town for us. But this night I wrestled JT Nightmare. I won that match, and I don't really remember that much about it. I don't even remember who really JT Nightmare is. One of the long list of guys that would just come in, I would meet, I would wrestle, and then we'd part ways, and I may or may not ever see him again. But you know, that's the way it was back then. You know, a lot of guys breaking in, a lot of guys just coming through. But Buchanan is a town that you're going to hear over and over again on this podcast. On 4/17/98, I was back in Augusta, Georgia, and I wrestled as myself versus CW Justice, and I lost that match and made $50. Also, that night, I wrestled as the Panther, and I'll get into that in just a second, versus Johnny Blitz, and we wrestled to a time limit draw. The Panther was a character that I came up with based off of Tiger Mask. And I was smaller then. Nowadays, the guys are a lot smaller than they used to be. And back in the days, I was pretty much a cruiserweight starting out in the 90s. And even though I was about 230, 240, that was around cruiserweight weight. And so a lot of times these promoters had me wrestling twice on the show. Well, I no longer had the outfits for the Infernos or Kendo or any of that stuff. So I came up with the Pink Panther, and it's basically Tiger Mask that's pink. And it was a luchador gimmick. And it was something that I was able to go out on the card and put somebody over and have a match with them and not really have to, worry about me doing a job or anything like that. This character was made specifically for that opportunity to put people over and further them up the card. But yeah, I made $50 for wrestling twice in Augusta. I always loved Augusta. The promoters down there, they always treated me well. I would go there a lot during this time period. Great town. I would hang out there and go, stay over and go out. Again, this is one of those trips where I was by myself and could hang out and do whatever I wanted to do after the show. So I could go get dinner and go to a club, get some beers, and see if I could meet a nice girl and just hang out. And it was kind of like a little mini vacation for me. And I just loved going to southeastern Georgia. The next town is Aniston, Alabama. And I don't have a date on here, so it was sometime between 4/17 and 4/24. So it close to that same week. We did a TV taping for Ken Timms was running Aniston, Alabama, and booking a flea market there. And we were doing it for TV. Not sure where the TV was going to air, but he filmed it. As everybody was sort of doing back then, everybody was kind of filming everything that they could if they had the opportunity to. Of course, again, this is not with full TV production. This was done with little camcorders, and I'm not even sure if he even got it edited. I don't think it even aired anywhere, but he was filming it as TV, and he had a bunch of his guys, and I ended up wrestling 3 times on this show in Aniston, and I made $70. The first match was against my friend Brian, who wrestled as Mr. Olympia. And if you remember, Brian is the guy from the power plant that had the knee injury. So he was still injured with his knees, but trying to work a little bit and trying to make a comeback, and it didn't pan out for him because of the injury that he sustained from trying out for the power plant and being in there and doing all those squats. Also on that card, I wrestled with the Judge versus Mr. Olympia and a guy named Travis. Again, I don't know if that's his first name or his last name. I don't know who the Judge was, but it was a tag match, and I went over on both of those matches, Logan versus Olympia and also the tag match. But the third match has an interesting story. I wrestled as myself against a guy that we called Mark Goldberg. Now, this guy was a nice guy, and you might remember him as the little Goldberg that was brought out by Jericho on WCW. And we played a rib, and that is what got him in WCW. So Ken Timms had a piece of paper that was letterhead from the WCW office. And he had been saving this for a big rib. And he found this guy, and his actual name was Mark, even though that fit perfectly. So we fashioned this letter, and we were very nondescript, and we were trying to describe Stone Cold Steve Austin, who had just started taking off. So we said that this is from the office, and that we've got a spot for you, we've got a job for you, and we want you to get black, shave your head, get a goatee, get black tights, black boots, short black boots, and that it was going to be a major position on television. So we fill this letter out in great detail and all this stuff, and we mail it from the post office at CNN Center. Well, Ken mails it. And this guy gets this, and he assumes he's going to be Goldberg, a little Goldberg. So he shows up at a WCW TV taping, which was in the letter of when to show up and all this. And he goes in, and they're like, "Who are you?" And he's like, I'm Mark, whatever his real name was. And, I just got hired by the company. And nobody obviously knew who he was. And so a couple of the agents get together, and he shows them the letter. Well, the letter looked legit. It was mailed from the office. It was typed out. I forget who signed it, I don't even know if we signed anybody's name to it. I doubt that we even did that. And finally, they end up getting Terry Taylor to come over. Well, Terry takes a look at the letter and looks at him and is just confused because he doesn't have the WCW look. He's not big enough. And, at this point, he had shaved his head, and he had the goatee, and he had all the stuff as the letter said. And Terry's like, "Well, you have this letter. I guess we've hired you." That just goes to show you how nobody at WCW during this time period knew what was going on, that the right hand had no idea about the left hand, and just accepted that this guy was hired. So they had him getting his gimmick and all this, and he had the MMA gloves and all this. He looked like a little Goldberg. I'm sure there's somewhere on YouTube you can Google Little Goldberg or Goldberg Imposter or Mark Goldberg. But anyway, he ends up getting a job and getting on TV and getting paid. So the rib was kind of on us because he made money off of our rib. But this night in Aniston, Alabama was his, he wanted to try the gimmick out, so I worked with him. I ended up beating him. And, we thought it was funny that night in Aniston, but it wasn't so funny after he got a job and started getting paid. And good for him. It wasn't his fault. It was kind of a cruel rib. And it's funny, but it's, it wouldn't be funny nowadays. I don't know if any company would fall for it nowadays, but, no harm was done in this rib. WCW got some good TV out of it, and Mark made some money off of the situation, and no harm was done, and a good time was had by all. So, on 4/24/98, I am back in Augusta, Georgia. The Panther went against the Desert Warrior, and I lost. And I made $70. Also, I wrestled with Johnny Blitz in a tag team match versus Wreaking Havoc, which was Eddie Edmonds and Scotty Blaze. And it was a double countout. So the two of them had made a road trip and came on down to Augusta. I got them booked, and they got out of West Virginia for a little bit, and we had a good time and had a good little match and had a double countout. So it was good that they got out and got some seasoning and all that, but it was just a typical house show there in Augusta, Georgia. On 4/25/98, we were in Butner, North Carolina. I made $20, and I wrestled as myself versus Otto Schwanz. Now, you might remember him as one of the Dupp brothers from TNA, and I love Schwanzy. He is so funny. He's one of those guys that's just one of the boys through and through. He was very talented in the ring. He did this German gimmick that was kind of special needs, German, half special needs, half German kind of thing. You had to kind of see it to understand it. It was a comedy character, but a character that wrestled, it was very serious. And me and him always had good matches over the years. And at one point, he said that he would only wrestle two guys. He got to a point in his career where he was like, I'm either wrestling Logan or Frank Parker, and I'm not wrestling anybody else. And I don't know if he ever wrestled anybody else after he said that. But on 4/29/98, I was in Carrollton, Georgia. And me and Primetime Brian, which was the other Brian, wrestled Notorious Dog and Homicide. Now, this match is interesting in itself because this match was the shits. It was terrible. It was absolutely horrible. And I ended up walking out in the middle of the match. I didn't get paid. These two guys started the match with Brian and immediately locked up and started suplexing him and doing all these big moves. And then Dog and Homicide had a shoot argument amongst themselves in the middle of the show. I'm watching this thing. They're almost ready to hurt Brian, and they're about to get into it with each other, and it was just too much. And this was the only time I've ever walked out of a match in the middle of a match. And I just decided it wasn't worth it. There was no storyline in this match. There was probably maybe, 30 people in the crowd. It was a little bar in Carrollton. And it was absolutely horrible. But Notorious Dog, some people in the music industry might know him. He was a roadie for Confederate Railroad. So he was very known. I think he worked also as a roadie for Molly Hatchet for a little bit, but his main deal was he was a roadie for Confederate Railroad. But for whatever happened that night, him and this homicide, and it's not the TNA homicide. This was a different homicide, different era, a local guy. And they had some issue, and I thought they were going to come to blows. But I ended up walking out and went to the back, grabbed my stuff, and went to the car. And they actually came outside trying to work the match with me outside. There was no people. The people were inside, and they thought it was part of the gimmick that I walked outside with my bag. And boy, were they shocked when I got in the car and drove off. And I drove off and never came back. So I don't know what happened the rest of that night, but it was one of the worst nights in the business that I've ever had. On 4/30/98, I was in Raleigh, North Carolina, wrestled as myself versus Juice. I won that match and made $20. I have no idea who Juice was. Don't know anything about this match. It was just another in those long lists of matches that, again, like I said, I meet the guy and move on. On 5/2/98, we were in Clarksburg, West Virginia, and I wrestled as myself against Buddy Rose, lost, and made $50. Now, this is not Playboy Buddy Rose. This is a guy from up in the northern West Virginia area who worked for Jim Hawkins, who was Freebird Buddy Rose. He actually legitimately thought he was a Freebird. And he would talk about in the back about calling Terry Gordy or Buddy Roberts or Michael Hayes. And that he tried to tell the young boys that he was one of the original Freebirds. And we were like, it's Buddy Roberts, not Buddy Rose. So Buddy Rose is a totally different guy. But this goof was a complete goofball. And he just ran his mouth constantly. And he was constantly brushing his hair. And he did the Michael Hayes strut all the time. And Jim Hawkins thought it was funny to put me in there with him all the time. And it was not funny, and they were not good matches. And I had to deal with him, and he always brought his daughter, and, you couldn't explain anything to him because his daughter was right there. She was in the locker room with him, which was the first time that I had saw a family member in the locker room like it was nothing. And that right there was the beginning of the business changing, because before that, something like that would have never been thought of, that only the boys were allowed in the locker room. But he had his daughter, and she was of age. She was, 18, 19, 20, somewhere around in there. But he always had her with him, and, used that as a crutch of, you can't tell me anything because you're not going to talk to me in front of my daughter like that. So that was one of those nights, man. I really just did not like this Buddy Rose guy. He was a piece of work. But if you really look back on a 30-year career, he's an interesting character because he really believed that he was a Freebird. I mean, through and through believed he was a Freebird and told everybody. And I mean, he was mentally ill. And he just, he wore pink tights and white boots, long blonde hair, completely out of shape, not even a dad bod, just looked horrible and just couldn't wrestle, couldn't do anything. But he was a Freebird. On 5/16/98, I was in Clay, West Virginia, and I first wrestled as the Panther versus a kid that we called... He did the Austin gimmick, and I can't remember his first name here. I don't have his first name, but he looked like Austin. He looked like a little Austin. I lost that match as the Panther, but I want to say Brian Austin, but that's not right. I think that's an actor off of 90210. Joey Austin, that's his name. Stone Cold Joey Austin. And he was an okay worker. He was just small. He had been in a car accident and went through the windshield. And his head had been cut up and scarred up, and he had all these cuts and scars on his head from where the stitches were. And he would talk to himself since the car wreck. And he kind of hummed when he wasn't talking. And it wasn't like he was schizophrenic or anything. He just talked to himself. And he would, you could hear the ongoing conversation he was having, and then in between him. But he was a good kid. And you could have a match with him, and it was perfect for the Panther. So I would later on end up working him in like the second match on a lot of these shows and be able to put him over and give him a win, because you got to think this was when Stone Cold was first starting out, and it was a parody. Now, it was a bad parody. I don't know if it was a parody that should have been done, but we did it, and that was the way it went. And the Panther versus Austin was a good little second match. Later that night, on 5/16/98, and I'm repeating the date because I wrestled Eddie Edmonds. I won that match, made $60 for the whole night, but it was the first ever in West Virginia, fans, you bring it, we'll use it. And I came up with that match after watching a videotape of Al Snow arriving at ECW. Someone had given me a VHS copy of Al Snow's debut at the ECW arena, and I was sitting there and I was watching it, and I called up Troy and I said, let's do a weapons deal. This ECW thing's gonna kick off. Let's do a fans you bring it, they'll use it. And then we put on the poster exactly that. And, of course, we also put no knives or firearms, and they will not be accepted in there. But all the fans brought everything. They brought chairs. They brought sinks. They brought trash can lids, a bullwhip, crutches, just anything tires, anything you can imagine they brought. And we used it. And the house that night was pretty good. This is also, we talked about this, I think on one of the ride homes, where I started doing the personal appearances at the Go Mart in Clay, because there's nothing there to do in Clay. So you had the Go Mart and you had the school, and that was about it. So I would come in and I would do a personal appearance and hype the show at Go Mart in my tights and everything, and then we'd go have the show. So it wasn't a sellout, but it was a near sellout. So there was a couple of hundred people there that night for the fans you bring it and we'll use it. And of course that was Falls Anywhere, and it went very good. And I remember the one thing was that we had all these weapons, and with the weapons I needed to bleed and to make it believable. And Chrissy, Troy's wife, was totally 100% against me bleeding. And I was like, well, this is going to look phony if I'm hit with all of these items, because God knows Troy wasn't going to be hit with any of these items. So I got hit with everything. And at the very end, I forget what object he hit me with. It was probably a chair or a trash can. I roll out to the floor and end up bleeding. And he came out and did a couple of moves to me, and then I somehow get a quick win on him. And she complained. She complained about that because, she didn't want any blood in the ring, or she thought it was too violent and too embarrassing to her to have people bloodied from a chair or a trash can. So that started more issues with that whole situation. On 5/22/98, we were in Kingwood, West Virginia. I wrestled as myself against Lance Malinowski, and I lost and made $50. Lance was a guy that I believe he was from up there in Morgantown, Kingwood area, Clarksburg maybe. He might have been from Clarksburg. But that whole area, that northern West Virginia area, real good guy. Couldn't wrestle very well at all. But he was a good guy to be around and a funny guy. And Jim Hawkins really liked him. And he put him in a program with me. And at least it gave me another opponent. And we were trying to find as many opponents as we could up there. Again, we're trying to get this promotion off and running, get some legs underneath it, trying to find guys, training guys, using guys, trying to see what formulas would work. And so Lance became one of the top heels, which got me away from Troy a little bit and kind of split the card up a little bit so he could wrestle in a tag match, which gave a good tag match, and then I could wrestle Lance. On 5/23, the next night in 98, we were in New Martinsville, West Virginia. And again, it's another match, the same as Kingwood. I wrestled Lance Malinowski. I lost and made $50. And pretty much the same match, same everything. On 6/6/98, I was in Clarksburg, West Virginia, wrestled Lance Malinowski again. Lost this time and made $50. So they wanted me to put him over in Clarksburg. So they wanted the heel to go over in Clarksburg, which made no sense because there was nothing on the line there. So we should have let him go home with everything. On 6/13/98, we should have let him go home happy is what I was trying to say. On 6/13/98, we were back in Buchanan, West Virginia, and I wrestled Eddie Edmonds, made $50, won by count out. And that night, Troy hurt his shoulder. I ended up drop kicking him, and he took a bad bump. We did tackle, drop down, hip toss, drop kick, and he was hurt. And that was it. And he ended up stopping the match because he got hurt. He didn't want to continue. He didn't try to tough it out. He just stopped. So if you see during this time, we're trying to get this promotion going, but there's so many factors going on. There's so many things that are happening, and they're just throwing monkey wrenches into everything. And it was just so trying because this was the birth of the indies. You know, before this, I had pretty much worked in territories or places aspiring to be a territory with wrestlers that were professional and professionally trained. This was the time period where we were getting the first generation of copies. So these guys were either trained by us or trained by God knows who. So the ones trained by us could have a match. Not all of them, but they could mostly have a match. But Jim Hawkins would find these guys and bring them in. And who knows what their background was? Who knew who their trainer was? You know, they said they could have a match, so he threw them in there. And I was the measuring stick on whether to have a match with them or not. And it was just a lot of things. But I was very disappointed in Eddie Edmonds that night because we could have worked around his shoulder. We could have worked holds. Because that was back in the day where you could sit in a hold. Nowadays, you can't sit in a hold. They'll chant boring. But back then, you could have grabbed a hold, a chin lock or a headlock or something, and we could have worked out of that whole thing and did 5 minutes. But he didn't want to do that. On 6/19/98, the Panther with Sir Alfred wrestled R.J. Stomper in Man, West Virginia. Now, this was the first time that I had went to Man, and the last time I had went to Man. And I came from Atlanta, and it is actually closer to go to Cuba from Atlanta than it is to go to Atlanta to Man, West Virginia. And incidentally, on this trip, I'm starting out and it's probably about 60 miles from where I lived to the Tennessee border. And I'm driving up the interstate and the rain is just pouring down. And lightning strikes right beside my car in the median of the highway, right by it. so close that my face was burnt a little bit from the heat. Not burnt like blistered or anything like that, but you could tell something had came close to me, and it was, like a suntan type thing. So my nerves were shot immediately, and then it took like 8 hours to get to this town. But the Panther wrestled with Sir Alfred, who is J.R. Earls, who is a good friend of mine, who is an incredible artist, against R.J. Stomper, who we talked about, I believe, in one of the podcasts. He was our version of the hillbilly. And very good, about a 400-pound guy, could work really well and did the gimmick very well. And then later that night, I wrestled Roger Anderson and won by DQ, and I defended the MSWA title against Roger Anderson, and I made $50 for the whole night. So you see what they're doing here is my pay is not increasing, but they're making me work twice. So they're getting 2 guys for the price of 1, 2 matches. And that was always something that I had a problem with Jim Hawkins, is he never paid more than $50. And I was coming from Atlanta, Georgia. And he'd be like, well, none of these other guys are making any money. Yeah, but I'm the guy on the marquee. I'm the guy that we're putting the asses in the seats, because back then that's what it was about, was putting asses in the seats. It was my name on the poster. There were no TV commercials. There were no radio commercials, so to speak. I mean, they did use some local radio at different times, but it was me, and they would have, 300 or 400 people sometimes, and I get $50 and have to work twice. And then, God forbid, I would complain about it because they would say that it was unfair. So Jim Hawkins is a cheap bastard. And I just want that to be known for the record. And at one point, the reason I say it that way, that strongly, later on down the line, when I finally end up not working with those guys anymore, he told me something that I thought was one of the rudest things I've ever heard in my career. He said, if I was working in an industry and I had been working for years and was only making minimum wage, I'd quit and find something else to do. And I thought, you know what? Fuck you. You jock sniffer. He was never an athlete. He was just trying to live a dream, and how dare he say something like that to me, who was drawing him and making him this money. So me and Jim had a love-hate relationship based upon that. But I like Jim. Jim's an okay guy, but he's a cheap bastard. And it would show over the years, and that would hurt this West Virginia promotion. And I think ultimately would hurt the state of the industry over the years, in West Virginia, because it would become okay to not pay guys and get a watered down product, to where it almost became commonplace, to where if you get there to today, guys are working for free because they don't know any better. Because the promoters that are left from back then are like, well, hot dog and a handshake, that's what I got when I broke in. Well, it's not then. It's not 20-some years ago. It's not 30-some years ago. It's different now. And my advice to everybody, if you're a young guy in the business, don't work for free. That's not paying your dues. Paying your dues is putting up the ring, taking the ring down, making the long drives. Working for free is not paying your dues. It's a job, and you're working, and you need to be paid for what you're worth. Now, I'm not saying go out there and charge $500 and you've had 10 matches. What I'm saying is don't constantly go to a show and the promoter says, well, I'll put you on the card, but I don't have anything to pay you. And you want to wrestle so bad that you just allow it to happen. Don't do that, guys. Don't do that. Don't let these promoters get away with all that. But on that night in Man, West Virginia, I got to wrestle Roger Anderson, and great buddy of mine that we know from Southern States Wrestling. I wrestled him many times over the years. We've already talked a lot about him on the podcast, but this was starting the many matches we would have as singles over the years, and it was a great match. And I love working Roger Anderson. Shout out to Roger. I love you, brother. On 7/3/98, we were back in Clarksburg, West Virginia. The Panther wrestled Scotty Blaze and lost. And I made $50 again. And I came back, and it was, of course, the 4th of July weekend. So who does Brian Logan wrestle? The Iron Sheik, with Eddie Edmonds and Lance Malinowski in his corner. And I am such a huge fan of the Iron Sheik. I love Sheiky. I miss him. He was such a great dude. And we had such a good match that night. We did the clubs. And then he attacks me. And we end up having the match. And, of course, I won that match because it, put the babyface over. But the funny thing on that rib was, there's two stories, two ribs that was going down. One was, I'll tell the last one first and then the first one. But we basically, I was so excited for working the Iron Sheik that I thought the crowd was really into it, and I just marked out for wrestling, because I had, the Iron Sheik was like the second wrestling doll I ever had as a kid. I grew up watching him on WWF. It was 4th of July weekend. I had red, white, and blue tights. It was just really, really cool. And I was so excited. I remember getting out of the ring, and I went back to Troy, and I was thanking him for the match, and he's like, "What'd you think?" I said, "Man, I loved it." And I went out, and I noticed that the people weren't leaving. And I was like, man, they loved it so much, they're not going home. They're not going home at all. They're just so into this. There's so much heat, because they all attacked me after it, all the three heels. And I was just so pumped and everything. But like an idiot, Troy looks at me and goes, "There's a battle royal." And I was like, oh. So I thought that I was so over. And it really wasn't. But, okay, so here's the rib. And this is terrible, and I'm glad it didn't work out, because this is a terrible rib, but it's a great story. So the Sheik has these iconic boots with the pointy toes, and he's synonymous for his boot and his loaded boot and his Arab-looking boots with the camel on the side and everything. So me and Troy decide we're going to steal the Iron Sheik's boots as a rib. And we were like, if he catches us, he's going to kill us. If he catches us and gets his hands on us, he's going to hurt us. So we devised this plan that how we were going to get the boots when he took them off, and if he was in the shower or somehow somebody was going to distract him, we were going to grab the boot. The boots was going to get handed to the next guy. The next guy was going to rush it out to the car, and the person in the car was going to take off and drive the boots away. Nobody none for the wiser. We get these boots out. And we planned this thing for weeks, and we laughed about it and all this. But we were very cautious, because we did realize that this was something very dangerous that we were about to do. And the rib was on us, because the Iron Sheik never took his boots off. He showed up with the boots, those iconic Persian shorts that he wore, and a sweatshirt, or a workout shirt, t-shirt, workout t-shirt. And that's all he had. So he took his shirt off to wrestle, and he took his shorts off. He had his tights on underneath. And he never took the boots off. Not before the match, not after the match. I guess the deal is he could only get them laced, because he wasn't in the greatest shape at that point. This is well past his WCW run. He was just doing the indies. But yeah, we were going to steal them, but he never took them off. And honestly, I'm glad we didn't do it, because that's a shitty rib, and that's not a good rib. And it shows how green we were. It's a funny idea, but it wouldn't have been funny in application of it. I mean, that's stealing somebody's boots. That's not cool. And I don't recommend that. That was just something that we came up with as a rib, and it just turns out it wasn't funny. So, you have that a lot, that things, seem funny at the time, but just aren't really that funny to, in reality. On 7/8/98, I'm back in Nashville, Tennessee for Music City Wrestling TV. This time I have another new name, Lance Erickson versus Dusty Dotson. And I won that match, and I made $40. And you're thinking, well, we've heard that name before, Lance Erickson. Well, yes, the Lance Erickson in West Virginia got his name because I had used the name Lance Erickson in Nashville, and it was part of the angle. And we'll tell that story when we get to him being a part of the book and a part of the overall story. But when I came back to Nashville, Bert said, I'll give you, come in and do a couple of matches, and when we bring you back, we'll give you a gimmick. Well, that gimmick was Lance Erickson. He liked that name, and that's the new name that he gave me. This time I was figured in and was part of the whole deal. And I worked Dusty Dotson, who was there a lot. I can't really remember much about Dusty, but I know he was there and was one of the guys that was featured on TV every week. And he basically put me over on TV. So it's wild. But yeah, Lance Erickson from West Virginia got his name because I was given the name Lance Erickson in Nashville, Tennessee when we did the big angle with me and Rocky Blankenship, which is Lance Erickson's real name, where he was trying to become me. And more on that in the future. On 7/10/98, we were back in Kingwood, West Virginia. The Panther wrestled Scotty Blaze and lost. And then I wrestled Eddie Edmonds again and won in the main event and made, guess what, $50. So, typical Kingwood, 300-400 people, and it was what it was. But me and Eddie had a good match. Me and Scotty had a good match. But I stand corrected. I said I had not been back to Man, but on 7/17/98, we did go back to Man, West Virginia. So I've been there more than once. And I wrestled as myself with Mike Crosby, my buddy, who is the baseball coach. Shout out to Mike. How you doing, brother? And we wrestled Frank and Roger Death and Destruction to a double count out. And I made nothing for that show. They didn't pay me nothing to go all the way to Man. And, we had a good little match. And I think that match is on YouTube. I think Mike went as Mike Montana or Mike Montgomery. I think it was Mike Montana. But I'm pretty sure that match is on YouTube. If so, I will post the links to the Facebook page so everybody can see it. And it was a good little match, a long match. We got our time in. And it was good. It was very good. But yeah, I had went back to Man. I bring up Man because I will be going back to Man in July for the Street Festival, the fair that they have there every year, and I will be going this July. So I haven't been to Man in, 20 years. So at least, and that's just guesstimating. But I will be back in Man and coming up in this July. All right, the next contest was on 7/18/98. I was in Lewisburg, West Virginia. I wrestled as myself versus Steve Ramsey. I won, made $50. It was an MSWA title match. And Steve was another guy that came in that we were trying to do some stuff with. Good kid, good guy. An athlete. His body wasn't the greatest, but he looked like a man. He didn't look like a kid, but he could have a good match with you. So we used that. Troy put him with me, and it was just another opponent to challenge. I wish we could have filmed all these, because there's a story that goes along with all of these different contenders and the MSWA title and trying to make it and all that. And we were really just trying to build the area, trying to get the territory up and going and running as much as humanly possible. So, all right, well, we're going to stop right there for right now. But this show was brought to you by W Energy Drinks. Use promo code YourChampion at checkout for 10% off. W Energy Drinks has 0 sugar, 0 artificial colors or flavors, no secret formulas, no hidden ingredients, gluten-free. Equals out to about $1 a drink compared to other drinks. It's made in the USA. What it does do is promote clean, smooth energy, sharper mental focus. Again, no added sugars, and has very unique flavors. And this is built for anyone. All you have to do is put a scoop in your shaker bottle, add some water, and shake it up, and you're ready to go. Flavors include cherry limer, which is my favorite, retro rainbow sherbet, sour gummy bear, sweet and sour blue raz, Japanese yuzu, Japanese soda, s'mores, lunar strawberry margarita, push and punch, beach and peach, and much more. It's about 150 milligrams of caffeine per serving. They ship worldwide, ready to mix anywhere that you want to do this. And it's made for anyone. So I tried this stuff out. It is a godsend. It really gets me past the afternoon where I get really tired from being up so early and dealing with the puppies and working, and it really gives me a boost in the afternoon. Be sure to check out all of our social medias. It is Making the Towns on Facebook. Follow me there, as well as Brian Logan on Facebook. Also, Brian Logan Making the Towns on Instagram. Find me there. We talked about the YouTube. I am your champion ! On YouTube. Please subscribe and hit the bell. I am your champion on TikTok and on X or Twitter, whatever you call it. Three Crows Entertainment at Logan Your Champ. But all the socials are on IamYourChampion.com. So if you don't want to remember all these handles, but you want to stay up to date with everything we're doing, then go to IamYourChampion.com. And right there on the front page down at the bottom, it has links to all the social media, as well as W. I don't think I gave you the address before, w.gg. Be sure to put in the promo code YourChampion at checkout for 10%. I know I'm all over the place, but just go to IamYourChampion.com. On the home page, they have right there all the social media links. Just click on the button, as well as a way to check out W. But also go over and check out our store. We have a lot of cool stuff on the store. We've been talking about the Slam Buddies, and they are really cool. They're little plushies that look like me. They did a great job making these things, especially the tattoos. The tattoos are on point. I don't know how they got the tattoos on these plushies, but they are identical to my tattoos. But we've been saying if you want them, get them. Well, there are 4 left. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you want a plushie, now is the time to get it. We will not be ordering any more of these plushies. We're retiring this item. So these are the last 4 in captivity. If you want them, then, now's your time to go get it. These will not last. I have a couple of live shows coming up, and I guarantee they will be gone. So if you're hearing this and you want one of the Brian Logan plushies, go immediately to the store and order you one, because there will not be any more after, I'm going to be doing the Bash and Beckley here in a couple of weeks, and I guarantee they will not make it past the Bash and Beckley. So if you want them, now is your time to get that. Speaking of the Bash in Beckley, let's go over my schedule real quick. Well, let me finish telling you about the store first. I'm all over the place today. It's a weird day. I got a lot going on, but also we have pictures. We have the congregation book, which I think is the best thing I've ever written there. But we have ring used memorabilia. Some of the Damien boots and Damien outfits are there. Some of the ring-used belts are there. A ring jacket that I wore that is a tribute to Jimmy Valiant. That's all on there for sale. Even if you're not interested in buying, go over and take a look at them. They're really cool merchandise, ring-used items, and they're kind of cool to look at. But if you are a collector, these are some one-of-a-kind things that they're not going to last very long. Some of them are going to be gone soon. The Smoky Mountain jacket, which is a black jacket with white lettering that only the office got the blacks. This is the last one in captivity. This is the last known Smoky Mountain jacket. It's for sale. It will go soon. I've already had some inquiries about it. If you're looking for an item like this, now's the time to get it. Like I said, it is the last one, and when it is gone, it is like the plushies. It is gone for forever. So go over and check out the shop at IamYourChampion.com. All right, now let's talk about where I will be. Coming up in June, on June 12th, I will be in Salyersville, Kentucky for Wildfire Championship Wrestling, and on June 13th, I will be at the Bash in Beckley for the big event there for All-Star Wrestling. Huge card at the Bash in Beckley coming up next month. Lots of stars. Just tons of stars. You go over to All-Star Wrestling on Facebook and take a look at all the stars that are going to be there. Just tons and tons of people. Huge, huge card. It is the biggest event every year in West Virginia history. And I know that it gets bandied around a lot, but Gary Dameron and Stephen P. New do a wonderful job of promoting, and they're bringing in everybody, just everybody, to be on this thing, and as they do every year. And it's shaping up to be wonderful, and I will be there signing at the meet and greet and during the event. And I'm looking so forward to seeing all my buddies there, seeing Gary and seeing Steven again. But, yeah, the Bash in Beckley, Saturday, June 13th at the Raleigh County Convention Center in Beckley, West Virginia. The night before, we will be at the Lloyd M. Hall Community Center on the 12th in Salyersville, Kentucky for Wildfire Championship Wrestling. So that's where you'll see me coming up in the next couple of weeks, and looking forward to everything. So, as usual, we are on Pirate Flag Radio and the Radio King app. And, again, we have our sister show, The Ride Home with Dallas Danger. There's no paywall for this podcast now. It was on Patreon before. It is now free to everybody. And check it out. It's an interesting concept. If you enjoy this show, Dallas asks a lot of questions, and we go through and really expand on some of the stories. And we just have a few laughs and just sit down and talk with each other. And it's a good little sister show. So I just want to thank you for tuning in. And I'm Brian Logan, and we'll see you next week. And remember, I am your champion.
I am your champion. Oh man, that's classic. I love it. I'm going to climb that ladder of success all the way to the top.